What's up, legends, and welcome back to another Unmatched First Impressions video. Today we are finally looking at the third character from the new For King and Country set, Black Widow. I was able to make these videos early because Restoration Games actually sent me a preview copy of For King and Country to get a special sneak peek at, I guess. So thank them for that. I thank them for that. And there will be a link at the top of my description if you want to go to their store and buy it from them. So Black Widow, kind of crazy because there's a lot going on with this character. First, let's take a look at the mini. Obviously, we can see Black Widow with her electric batons jumping off of an exploding pile of rubble or something. From the picture of like the preview of the minis, I was like, I don't know if I like this, but holding it in person is, I'm sold. This is like a very cool mini. And of course we got Maria, not from West Side Story, but from The Hills. And the card back where we can see Skojo staring us down, and then on the side we got Maria, the shield logo, and some explosion, smoke, espionage, spy thing. And of course we got the hourglass in the background. A lot more red than I would have thought in this character's like color scheme. It's a lot more brighter than I would have thought. I would have thought it would have been like more black, but again, I know nothing about Marvel lore besides MCU, so what do I know? Black Widow. Let's take a look at her stats. She is ranged, has 13 health, and has a sidekick, Maria Hill, who is also ranged with 6 health, and they share a move value of 2. So this is a nice double range team like Willow and Tara, Yananga and her archers, Ingen and his workers. Double range is really good, so move 2 is fine. 13 health, little squishy for a ranged character, makes sense though. Maria Hill, 6 health for a sidekick, also a little squishy, except Maria can be an absolute tank if she wants to be, most of the time. And a lot of the time your opponent wants to kill Maria as fast as possible, so Black Widow can kind of like go unscathed for the first half of the game. And even then, she's still got some decent defenses. So anyways, Black Widow is mission ready. So before drawing your starting hand, add the Moscow Protocol card to your hand. Then shuffle your deck and draw 5 cards. So your starting hand is 6 cards instead of 5. So basically, Black Widow, her whole thing is she has these mission cards, which are 5 schemes that all have like a condition that you have to meet in order to play them, and then they have an effect that happens when you play them, and you can only play them if you meet the certain condition. We'll talk about the specifics in a second, but there are some rules here. So missions, when you complete them, allow you to acquire a new mission. So basically, you'll always have a mission in your hand. You'll always have some kind of like side quest to work for, which is a pretty interesting new mechanic. And so when you acquire a new mission, you reveal cards from the top of your deck one at a time until you reveal a new mission card. You add that mission to your hand, then you shuffle the other cards you revealed back into your deck. So that's kind of crazy, actually. You and your opponent will both see cards from your deck until you get a mission. Your opponent will know which mission you have because you'll add it to your hand, then you shuffle everything back into your deck, which can give your opponent a lot of knowledge about your hand, kind of from process of elimination. Like if you are revealing cards from your deck and you reveal all of your remaining fates, your opponent knows, oh, you don't have any fates in your hand. Kind of situations like that arise, but most of the time early in the game, it's not going to matter too much because you'll just reveal like 7 copies of 7 or 1 copy of 7 different cards, and your opponent's like, okay, cool, you have a bunch of cards in your deck, probably a variety of cards in your hand. In competitive play, that might matter a lot, especially when it gets to the end game scenarios where your deck is kind of thinned out and maybe having one or two crucial cards in your hand or in your deck uh, could make the difference. So giving your opponent that knowledge could be bad. And if you're playing with really sweaty people, they could like write down all the cards that are in your deck when you play that. But whenever I've played against Black Widow, I'm just like roughly keeping track of the cards there, just giving it a good old once over. And I do make a note of if like all the copies of cards are either revealed from the deck or in the discard pile. I kind of make a mental note about that. But other than that, it's like, okay, I'm not really going to try that hard and commit this to memory, but maybe I should. So another thing is, if you do not have any missions left in your deck, you do not acquire a new mission. So this interaction actually came up in my first game against Black Widow. I was playing with Palm, and we didn't really know what we were doing because these were new characters. So Palm didn't actually have any missions left in his deck, but he went to go acquire a new mission, and he just kept drawing and drawing and drawing, or revealing, I should say, revealing cards from his deck until we got to the bottom of his deck and there was no mission. And we both looked at each other and we were like, oh, okay, so you only have 5 missions. And you probably don't do that if you know there are no more missions in your deck. Probably don't go through the whole deck and show everyone your cards, because then that gives your opponent perfect hand knowledge. So I reached out to Brian of Restoration Games and asked for just a rules clarification. And yeah, that's basically what it means. Like if you either play your last mission or you're holding the other missions that you have that your opponent doesn't know about in your hand. So like you've played 3 missions, you have 2 missions in your hand. There's no missions left in your deck. You have to go acquire a new one. You just say, I have the other missions in my hand, and maybe you just show your opponent. And you don't go through that whole process of revealing your deck. So missions, schemes with conditions, with really good effects, and after you play them, you get a new scheme with a good effect. So it kind of like draws a card from your deck, but a mission is probably like better on average than most of the cards. So you're drawing a good card. It's a tutor effect, I think, is what that's called in other card games. It's very good. It's kind of I think of this package as like Bruce's Jeets or Sinbad's Voyages. You have unique cards, like 5, 6, or 7 of them, that all kind of have a similar effect, but are all slightly different. But like there's Jeets, there's Voyages, and now there's missions. And normally the flack I give those kinds of decks is the consistency, because there's a big difference in drawing heal voyage. I almost said heal Jeet. Heal voyage, discard voyage, damage voyage, and then getting a nice voyage home with that, versus like the move voyage and the draw voyage, or like the swap Jeet and nothing else. Missions kind of like give you a lot of consistency because they find other missions. So you're always going to have some of them. You're always, especially because you start with one in your hand. That's basically your whole ability, is you start with the Moscow Protocol in your hand. So right from the get-go, you have a mission with a pretty easy trigger to find you a new mission, and that'll set you up for a great game, a little bit more consistent than some of the other like unique cards. So let's finally take a look at these missions and see what they do. So the Moscow Protocol, all of them have a boost value of 4, by the way. Mission: an opposing fighter took damage this turn. And the prize for completing that is you get to draw a card and gain an action and then acquire a new mission. So an opposing fighter took damage this turn. This is still a scheme, so it costs an action to play. So this basically means on your first action, probably attacked an opponent, dealt them some damage, then you can play this second action, and you'll draw a card, gain an action, so kind of won't cost an action in that sense. And then you'll also acquire a new mission. So it's kind of like a draw 2, gain an action, and one of those cards is better than a normal card. Very nice. It's good to have this one in particular in your hand at the start of the game because it does draw you a card, which I think in terms of effects is like great to have at the beginning of the game. And getting a new mission is always good. And like this mission kind of would be a little less powerful later in the game. So it's a good like starter mission in that sense. This mission I also think helps a lot more if Black Widow goes second, because that way your opponent has initiative. They'll run up to you usually, and then maybe on your first turn you can play an attack because you're ranged and hit them and then play this. Whereas if you're going first, you start with like pressured initiative because you start with 6 cards in your hand, so you actually can't double maneuver on your first turn because you'll overdraw at the end. So if you're going first, that kind of forces you to maneuver and attack your opponent, which won't be too hard for a double ranged character, but you probably will have to boost on like half of the maps. And if your opponent then if you start the game with initiative and your opponent is on the retreat, kind of like chasing them around and attacking them, you're probably not going to get this off for a couple of turns. So I think because of this card, Black Widow actually likes going second, but I need to play around with that and see if like an aggro Widow is like a viable thing. The next mission is the Kin Sasha directive. We'll just go with that one. Mission: Black Widow is in your starting space. Reward: choose an opponent, they discard 2 cards, acquire a new mission. So this is a relatively easy trigger to get, especially if this card is in your opening hand, because you can just play it from the get-go. And having an opponent discard 2 cards is pretty good. It's basically a Genie Wish, except this actually costs an action. This is really good if you are playing aggro Widow and pressuring your opponent, and then they have a relatively low hand size, and then you just discard 2 cards of them. That's just a really powerful effect. It is a bit telegraphed though, because you have to be in your starting space. So if you and your opponent are going back and forth and you kind of just like run away to your starting space, your opponent's gonna be like, I wonder what's happening, and then just they build up their hand. But it's a powerful effect nonetheless. And I noticed on the Helicarrier map, player 1 can start with their sidekick on a scheme token space. So potentially if Black Widow has this card in her opening hand and she puts Maria on that scheme spot, and one of the items in this box was both players discard 2 cards, you can play this scheme first action, then play the scheme token second action, and your opponent will discard 4 cards from their starting hand before they even take a turn, which is just ridiculous. The next card is the Madripoor Sanction, which is Black Widow is in an opponent's starting spot. So the directive is your space, the sanction is your opponent's starting space. And this effect is deal 2 damage to each of that opponent's fighters. Not in your zone, not in their zone. Deal 2 damage to each of their fighters. So you just carpet bomb the map, deal 2 damage to all of their fighters. Squirrel Girl loses all her squirrels. InGen loses all his workers. Yanenga loses all his archers, her archers. This card has ruined me in most of my games, because I've played against Black Widow more than I've played as her, and it's never leave the path, but on the whole map. and the condition is you just have to be in your opponent's starting spot. So maybe this changes the game where your opponent kind of like defends the base and tries to stop you from getting in that space, but that card is Nuts. Then we have the Budapest Gambit, which I think, yeah, it says it on the card, Clint. Hawkeye and her always talk about Budapest or something, so yeah, there's a Gambit there. The mission, you have 2 or fewer other cards in your hand. The reward is draw 5 cards. Each opponent discards 1 random card. Acquire a new mission. So this is kind of like Daredevil numbers. It's like you're blind boosting with this scheme. You have to have 2 or less after you play it. So if this is the 3rd card in your hand, you can play it, go down to 2, and then activate the effect, which draw 5 cards. So if you're at 2, you would go to 7, then you would acquire a new mission. So I actually think this is a good card to play, like literally when you have nothing in your hand, because then you'll draw 5 cards, and then acquire a new mission. You'll go up to 6 cards. So if you have 0 or 1, you won't be overdrawing, and if you have 2, you will at the end of your turn. But you can always play this first action and set yourself up in a position to attack your opponent's second action, which isn't a bad idea considering the other reward is that each opponent discards 1 random card, which is always a nice effect to get. Maybe discard a good defense from them and then attack them with your red 5 second action, and it's pretty good. This does kind of wreck your exhaustion game, as do all of the missions, because they all are like drawing cards from your deck. But this probably isn't a mission you recur, because you probably won't need the card draw all too often, although this is a really strong anti-aggression card, because drawing 5 cards would kind of just like ruin a character like the Raptors. They attack, you empty your hand, and then bam, you play this, draw 5, they lose a card. That's a huge momentum swing in any game. The looks like Fire NZ, but it's not Frenzy. Oh boy. The agenda. Black Widow is adjacent to an opposing fighter. Reward is deal 2 damage to each opposing fighter in Black Widow's zone. Acquire a new mission. So this is more in line with what Never Leave the Path is, except you just have to run up to your opponent and be adjacent to them, which seems easy enough, except you are a ranged fighter, so often you don't really want to put yourself in that position against a melee fighter to give them a chance to attack you more than once. But if this is a really good card if you're playing it like first action at the start of your turn, your opponent, or on their turn, your opponent ran up to you and hit you, and they're already next to you, so you may as well just play this because you have the opportunity. But if you're playing it in that situation, you might not get the best like damage output because your opponent can only send like 1 person into your zone to hit you. So I see the benefit from like setting it up suboptimally by like maybe maneuvering into your opponent's zone with a bunch of fighters and ending next to them, and then playing this second action to nuke the zone but leave yourself open to attack. So key thing to point out here, Black Widow has draw, and she can draw good cards, which are missions, and missions mess up your opponent either by making them discard cards, sometimes random, or dealing 2 damage to multiple fighters either in Black Widow's zone or on the entire board. So just crazy. And you wouldn't think it would get crazier, except Maria Hill's card. It's a 4 value versatile with a boost value of 3 and 3 copies, and it says it's called Acting Director of S.H.I.E.L.D. After combat, move each of your fighters up to 3 spaces. But wait, there's more. They may move through opposing fighters. Oh, but wait, there's more. Then shuffle 1 scheme from your discard pile into your deck. This card is busted. This card is so good. Like, this card would be good with like either the first half or the second half of the after combat effect, but it has both. So key thing I want to point out about this card is shuffling a scheme from your discard pile into your deck. The only schemes you have in this deck are your missions. So this acting director basically is mission recursion, which is really good. And shuffling it into your deck isn't even like it's fine because your missions specifically like search through your deck and get new missions. Obviously, you don't get to choose which one. It's just like the one that's topmost in the deck. But like for Winter Soldier, he has Reprogram, which shuffles like 3 cards into his deck. You might not see those cards for the rest of the game, but like you're pretty dang sure you will see the schemes you recur. Send like 1 or 2 missions away, which is crazy because then you can just deal 2 damage to each of your opponent's fighters. And there's 3 copies of this, so this basically adds like 6 more auto damage. So you can play this scheme 4 total times, with just 8 damage to everything on the board, which is crazy. You can also move each of your fighters up to 3 spaces, moving through opposing fighters, which is great to get out of pins. It's just like nice movement. And on top of those really good effects, it's a 4 value versatile, which means it's a really solid block. And if you attack with it, like worst case scenario, your opponent feints it and they take 2 damage. It's oh boy. And the decks without cancels, oh man. I don't know if Wukong or Yanenga even stand a chance against this character because they can't stop the recursion. And what happens if you try to kill Maria? You say baked goods. What happens then? Well, she has a life model decoy, which is a 0 value defense. 2 copies of it for Maria. It says after combat, if Maria Hill was defeated, place her adjacent to Black Widow. If you do, set Maria's health to 3. So this is kind of like the Holy Grail, except that it revives Maria adjacent to Black Widow with 3 health. Remember when I said Maria was squishy? Well, you might have to end up killing her like 3 times. I do not know the lore behind this card at all. The way Palm explained it to me was all the shield agents have life model decoys so that when they die, they're not dead. It makes sense to me. I don't know how any of this is ethical, legal, or possible, but you go, girl. This card art is also like slightly terrifying. I want someone to like Photoshop me into this where it's like a cow taking off my human face. That would be horrifying. But anyways, this is a good way to keep Maria alive because it's a 0 value block. Probably going to take some damage from it and then just revive again. This is after combat, which means this is absolutely horrible against offensive cancels like Bruce's Cancel Jeet or Invisible Man surprise attack or just a feint. But it'll only kill Maria if she has enough health to die from that attack anyways. So like fainting is really only a viable play when Maria's at 2 health or less, because then that would actually kill her. If Maria's at 3 health and you play this and your opponent plays a feint, it's like, oh, okay, cool. You just don't do damage to her and she's still alive. And offensive cancels generally would be pretty good into Maria since this card is also something you'd want to cancel. So I don't even know if you want to cancel any of Black Widow's cards. I think you just save all your cancels for Maria and either just try to bypass life model decoys effect or just stop her from recurring a scheme. So really strong kit so far. And oh, printed 5 for a ranged character. And it has text. There's 2 copies of Widow's Sting, which is a 5 value red for Black Widow. And after combat, you get to move Black Widow up to 3 spaces. So it's like the game is afoot from Sherlock's deck, except this actually can be canceled, but most of the time, if this is being canceled, you're very happy with that because that's probably 3 damage over a feint. Really good card. After combat movement is really good. It helps you set up kiting, and big values from range are amazing. Next card is Widow's Bite, which is a 4 value red card for Black Widow, only 3 copies, and it says, if you won the combat, your opponent discards 1 card. 4 value attacks, pretty good at winning combat. Depending on who you're going up against, in certain scenarios, like against Robin Hood or Bullseye, this will generally win every single time, which is really good card. You're dealing damage and making your opponent discard a card. Someone like Achilles, who can value block pretty well, might end up not really doing anything, but probably going to get a discard out of this in general in some matchups. You're fine if this gets feinted, because that's probably 2 damage. And just in total, it's looking like Black Widow has a lot of discards. This is 2 discards, potentially more if the directive gets recurred. Let's just say you recur this all 3 times. That's 8 discards, plus a random discard, plus potentially 3 normal discards. It's like 12 discards. People thought Medusa was a problem. Anyways, Widow's next card is Widow's Kiss. Yikes. Immediately. My mic is over here. The opposing fighter may not leave their space for the rest of the turn. You have 2 copies of this. It's a 4 value versatile. This is like Terrifying Roar from T-Rex's deck and Golden Bats, except this is just the opposing fighter, not all fighters. So this is a solid defense card. 4 value block, pretty good, and it prevents your opponent from moving for the rest of the turn, which means if they're trying to like hit you first action and then run away second action, they can't do that. If they're trying to like play Toil and Danger offensively so that they can kite with advantage, just any sort of movement effect, this stops. I think it would also stop Invisible Man's Vanish, but that's a rules clarification for someone who is a lot more invested in those types of things. Looking at you, Josh and Snuggies. How does that interact with Electra dying? Anyways, like what if Electra plays her 6 into this card? Does she leave the space, or does her corpse just stand there? Anyways, really solid card. Probably on defense. Caught in a Web. Black Widow 3 value versatile with 3 copies, and it says during combat, cancel all after combat effects on your opponent's card. I really like this card. It's a very interesting way to implement cancels into a deck, because instead of just canceling everything on your opponent's card, it's a very specific subset of their card, which cancels the after combat effects. So this usually isn't going to stop your opponent from dealing damage to you, because a lot of during combat effects like Momentous Shift or well, Ancient Heirloom isn't a good example because it can't be canceled, but Momentous Shift, like Sinbad's Voyages, those are all during combats. So this won't stop that, but it will stop the after combat, which in some cases is very good, like Battle Hardened, or like the actual after combat effect on Sinbad's Voyages. You really have to think about this a little bit more specifically, just because instead of just like a universal cancel, it's only an after combat cancel. So I'm sure there are some decks, perhaps Little Red, where this matters a lot more than others. But this is a very interesting card. 3 copies might be too much, but We'll double check how many fates she has, and if she has 3, then having 6 potential cancels is very good. Next card is Widow's Line. So basically, Widow has a sting, a bite, a kiss, and a line. Not going to be confusing at all to remember the names. Anyways, it's a 3-value versatile with 3 copies, and it says after combat, move the opposing fighter up to 2 spaces. This is pretty good in terms of like movement. You're probably going to be defending with this card just because you have better things to attack with. So moving your opponent after they attack you either means you can just move them out of the position they were in if they were on like a really good tri-zone spot. If they were on their starting spot trying to puppy guard it, you can move them out of the way. Or also just like pulling them in close to you to maybe pull the agenda. There's just a lot of interesting things you can do with this card. Even though it's only 2 spaces, just messing with your opponent's positioning is always fun time. I hate this card. I hate this card because it always works on me. Fake Out is a 1-value attack any, 2 copies, and it says after combat, if you lost the combat, draw 1 card and gain 1 action. So it's basically like For My Next Trick, except conditional on losing the combat. And I mean, most of the time you're going to lose the combat with this card because your opponent is probably going to respect a deck that attacks with 4s and 5s regularly. So you play this and your opponent feels like an idiot. This is like Jingu Bang 2.0. Oh boy. And next we have Double Identity, which is a 3-value any defense only card with 3 copies, and it says immediately. Immediately. My mic is over here. Black Widow and Maria Hill may swap spaces. If they do, your other fighter is now the defender. So this is like Helm, except it's a 2-way street. So you can actually helm your hero out for your sidekick, and they can take a, or you can helm your sidekick out for your hero. It's kind of hard to tell who's the hero in this team, but anyways, this is a really good card because controlling who your opponent attacks is amazing, and defensive immediatelys, as of right now, will always trigger. So you have a lot of control over how long Maria lives, or potentially how much damage you want Black Widow to actually sustain early in the game. Just a pretty flexible card, and even when Maria is dead, this is still a blank 3, which isn't horrible on defense. And lastly, we have feints. So Black Widow has 3 feints. So that's 6 potential after combat effects that can be canceled during a game, which we'll probably have to do like a card convo on this and see what matchups that really affects. But I don't know if I've made this clear or not, but like this character is really good. Just solid values all across the board. 3s on defense, 4s and 5s on offense, ton of auto damage, ton of discards, and really good recursion on a sidekick that is kind of hard to kill. She even has one of the best bait attacks in the game, like that. And she's double ranged. So yeah, I think Black Widow is like secretly the best character in this set, which like it shouldn't be a hot take, but with the amount of cards that Black Panther can steal from his opponent and the potential for Winter Soldier to literally go infinite, I see why people are sleeping on Widow, but she feels really, really strong. And I think there are just certain characters that she absolutely obliterates. Like I tested the Scroll Girl matchup with Palm, and it's horrible, just horrible. Like I said, Yanenga, Wukong. So yeah, I think Black Widow. I don't think she'll be S tier. I think she's gonna be like right below S tier, high A tier, what I would call higher tier. Not high tier, higher tier, but not like big three level. You'll understand in a week. Anyways, I'd love to know your thoughts on Black Widow because she seems crazy to me in the few games that I've tested, and I'd like to know your opinions on that because I think she is actually the most busted character from For King and Country. But yeah, let me know your thoughts. I would like to apologize for how late this video is coming out. It's literally like 2 weeks after the media embargo date was lifted and the set went on pre-order, but or order I should say, but my work schedule got changed around in the previous 2 weeks, and my sleep schedule suffered big time. And I was just constantly exhausted, and I just like, there was something wrong the first time I tried uploading this video. I'm obviously re-recording it because that's just how if a video is like sitting in my outbox for like more than a week, I'm like, yeah, fuck it, I'll just re-record it. Because I always like overthink everything that I said. But so anyways, I have not been sleeping well the last 2 weeks, so it's been really hard to find time to actually sit down and do this because there's like 5 aspects of life for me right now. There's work, sleep, baked goods, YouTube, playing board games, and literally everything else. And a lot of times it feels like it's like pick 3 fingers to do, and just the other 2 you can't. And so obviously work and sleep are high priority. So between making YouTube videos about the game, actually playing the game, and doing literally everything else, like I'm gonna be in a bowling league this summer. Just time, man. So sorry you couldn't get my thoughts on this character. I know there were a lot of comments like, but baked goods, this is a trilogy, where's the 3rd part? Life happens, and so finally got time to record this today, so I hope you enjoy it. And the next video is going to be the tier list, so yeah, that's exciting. So yeah, let me know how you're doing. Are you getting enough sleep? Are you drinking enough water? Oh, this is our reminder. Let's hydrate, homies. All right, ready? Sweet, delicious water. Hydrate. All right. This is baked goods telling you to go to sleep. If this is the middle of the night for you, don't stay up and watch another video. Go to sleep. Stop doom scrolling. Treat yourself right, king or queen or peasant. Not everyone can be in the palace. Baked Good says, enough YouTube, peasant, sleep. Just drink your water and go to bed. All right, that's it for this video. Like, subscribe, and yay!